everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
A number of CEOs do is they invite public criticism of themselves. So if they want a culture where people are going to be willing to tell them the truth, they can't just say to people, tell me the truth, I promise you I can handle it. They show people, I want some feedback right now. And they reflect on it. They don't get defensive. They thank people for it. They let them know what they've done with that feedback as well, so that people have proof for themselves that the CEO is serious when they talk about that.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Jeff Wetzler, co-CEO of Transcend. Welcome to the show today.
Great to be with you, Scott.
So I have to ask you, I know you are a researcher and this is your field of expertise, but tell me about why you decided to write this book about ask. Tap into the hidden wisdom of people around you for unexpected breakthroughs in leadership and life.
I wrote it for 2 main reasons. One is that the problem that the book is tackling is very painful and very pervasive. I have seen so many people suffer from this problem of not really finding out what those around them truly think, feel, and know, not really tapping into the ideas, the insights, the perspectives, the feedback. And I'll tell you myself, as an operating leader, I have suffered from this as well. I have, on many occasions found out things that only later did I realize this person didn't tell me this, or they told me too late. So it's a painful and pervasive problem. But the second reason is that I also believe it's possible to solve this problem. And I've been very fortunate in my own career to be exposed to ideas, tools, research, and mentors who have shown me a set of practices that, when put together, give us the greatest possible chance to overcome this problem. And I wanted to pay that forward so more people can benefit the way I did.
Now, of course, I think from an emotional intelligence, this makes perfect sense for us to self-actualize. And part of that self-actualization is the need to actually gain feedback from others. But let me start with something kind of odd, which is there are notable sociopaths that are out there, whether it's in the political arena, whether it's in corporate America. They're out there, and we know who they are. They don't really care, and they're not really interested in asking. What are your thoughts there?
I agree. I think that, I was thinking about the sociopaths on both sides, because there's people around us who might be sociopaths who don't want to help us. And in fact, they might be out to get us. And if we ask them the questions, they could use that as an opportunity to harm us. And there's also sociopaths who may not want to grow and learn and connect with other people. I don't know if you meant it in one way or the other, but I think it applies in both directions. And I'll just say this is not a book for the sociopaths. This is a book for the rest of us, and this is a book for the people who are surrounded by us. But I will say that sometimes we can experience other people as if they're malicious, or as if they have bad intent, when really we don't understand them. And so even though someone may seem like they're a sociopath, and some of them might really be, there's a lot more people who are coming from reasonable places, even well-intended or at least understandable places, that if we could only ask them the right questions and understand where they're coming from, we might not think they're as malicious as they're coming across.
I have to be honest, running this podcast, I have at times asked very poignant, sometimes kind of abrasive questions. And I think sometimes the subjects feel that they're being attacked, but when in fact, I'm just literally just curious. Yeah. And this brings up a really good point, which is, why do people withhold information, and what are some of those barriers that we're talking about?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll just say, as I mentioned earlier, it happens everywhere. In doing the research for the book, one study talked about how across a whole range of industries, from pharmaceuticals to advertising to financial services, over 85% of people in these organizations admitted remaining silent with their bosses about a concern at least once, and that 3/4 of them said the people around them also saw that concern and were also staying silent. Another study said that half of employees surveyed felt uncomfortable speaking up about any problem at work. And so it's everywhere. Even just to take it to our personal life for a second, another study talked about how, depending on the demographics, somewhere between 60 and 80% of Americans admitted to withholding information from their own doctor, not even telling their doctor information about themselves and their health. And then when they were asked, why aren't you telling this to your doctor? I mean, this could be life or death for you. This could make you more healthy as a person. And they, that some of the reasons were, one, they didn't want to seem difficult to the doctor. Two, they didn't want to waste the doctor's time. Three, it was embarrassing and they didn't want to be judged by the doctor. So those are, and just think about it. Like if we are withholding information that could literally help us be more healthy, imagine the information people are withholding about, the holes in your strategic plan, the better idea they have for your, for your innovation, the feedback they have for you. It's not going to be shared. So overall, in the research that I did, the number one barrier that holds people back from telling us what they think, feel, and know is they are worried about the impact of what they're going to say. They're worried we're going to judge them. They're worried that we're going to get upset, that we're going to get defensive, that it's going to put tension into our relationship. That's the number one reason. A couple of other reasons are, one is that they just can't find the time, they can't find the words to say it. So a really interesting piece of neuroscience research that I came across is that the human brain thinks at about 900 words per minute, but the mouth can only speak 125 words per minute. So if you think about that, in any given minute when we're talking to someone, we're only hearing less than 15% of what they're actually thinking through no other reason than the math. The math just doesn't allow the words to get out. So that's another reason. People also do lack time and energy. Sometimes they're worried if I raise this, then he's going to want to have a conversation with me. Then we're going to have to deal with it. I'd rather not get into it. But to me, the most interesting reason why people don't share that I discovered is that they actually don't realize we want to know. They don't think we're interested. And so if they don't think we're interested, then why bother sharing?
So we're going to come back to the last point because that is a very interesting point. And I want to go back to the example of corporate America. And of course, we've known for some time that as leaders move up higher and higher to eventually C-suite and eventually the chairman or CEO, that information gets very filtered. So what actually gets presented to the CEO or the chairman is a fraction of the real reality. And it's often been very much massaged in such a way that really it's been positioned in a very positive angle. And it's not really being presented in a balanced perspective that brings out some of the risk and challenges that should be confronted head on.
Yeah.
How should leaders, whether it's in private or public or even government sectors and nonprofits, think about being very proactive about asking, especially as they move up, given the fact that people tend to withhold information?
Yeah. So first of all, you're totally right. CEOs are notorious for being insulated from the truth. And specifically for that reason, in the book, I interviewed CEOs, including iconic CEOs of organizations like Kraft or Medtronic, and said to them, "How do you get to the truth?" And there were a few strategies that they shared. One is to be very intentional about who they surround themselves with, and surrounding themselves with people who are willing to challenge them, who are willing to be contrarians, who are not afraid of them. The second thing, and this relates to some of what I talk about in the book, is that when they interact with people, they're very intentional about the time and space and place that they interact with people, especially if they're interacting with people multiple layers beneath them. So this, the most effective CEOs that I talked about said, even if I trust the people who are my direct reports, I don't trust them enough that's going to be my only information source. I'm going to go talk to their direct reports. In fact, I'm going to go all the way to the front lines and talk to people. But I'm never going to ask them to come to my office and sit across the big CEO desk from me and assume that those people are going to feel safe talking to me. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go to where they feel comfortable. We're going to take a walk. I'm going to go to the cafeteria. We're going to have lunch together. I'm going to go with the sales reps in their car, and we're going to go make a sales call together on their terms, on their turf, in their territory, to make sure that I'm getting as much as possible the right information. And then also they talked about how do they react when they get the information? When someone says to them something that's not working, Literally, one CEO that I talked to said, I monitor my facial reactions because if I start to freak out or they think I'm judging what they're saying or whatever, that they instantly shut down. I've got to keep a receptive, somewhat neutral facial expression, appreciate what they're saying, no matter what it is that they tell me. And then the final thing that, a number of CEOs do is they invite public criticism of themselves. So if they want a culture where people are going to be willing to tell them the truth, they can't just say to people, tell me the truth, I promise you I can handle it. They show people, I want some feedback right now. And they reflect on it. They don't get defensive. They thank people for it. They let them know what they've done with that feedback as well, so that people have proof for themselves that the CEO is serious when they talk about that.
Yeah, I think the last point that you make is excellent from a role modeling, but the reality is that most corporations work with very large PR and reputation agencies. And so they're very careful about not only what the company says, but certainly what the captain at the helm is saying, as well as being perceived by the public. Now, I want to go back to this notion of fears and hurting people's feelings, judgments, shaming, punishing in the context of culture. And there's a pretty well-known case study, one of many really, about Korean Airlines during the 1980s and why there were some serious crashes and how culture played into that. And specifically, it was some of the co-pilots where they knew that the primary captain was making a mistake, but they were reluctant to voice themselves and let them know that there was an error that could potentially cost their lives as well as the passengers' lives. Can you talk about the importance of culture and how do we tune for that?
Absolutely. And there's a particular dimension of culture that I think is very salient in what you're saying, which is the level of psychological safety in the culture. And Amy Edmondson is a researcher at Harvard Business School, is well known for talking about the likelihood of which people will report errors or admit mistakes is directly shaped by how safe they feel, what they think the consequences are going to be in shaping mistakes. She did some fascinating research in hospitals where she looked and was initially puzzled because the most effective hospital teams had the most number of errors. And she said, how could that be? And then she dug into it. She realized actually it's because those teams feel safe enough to admit the errors. And that safety of admitting the errors is what allows those teams to learn faster as well. And so there's, she has a tremendous body of research on what leaders and organizations can do to build cultures of psychological safety. And then I translate that into the interpersonal level in this book, which is one of the 5 steps of the Ask approach. That's literally called Make It Safe. And it's about how do we bring that same level of psychological safety to our interactions with people. Some of it is what we were just talking about in terms of where and how do we create connection with people? Are we doing it in a time and place and space that they feel safe doing it? But a lot of it is also about opening up to other people. If we want that if we want that kind of culture where they're going to be honest and open and admit mistakes and share things, we've got to also open up and say to them, here's why I'm asking you the question. Here's what I'm uncertain about. Here's what I need to know from you. Here's something that I'm struggling with. And then the last piece of it is what I call radiating resilience, which is really letting people know, if you tell me something hard, I'm not going to jump down your throat. I'm not going to crumble. I'm not going to punish you for it. I might have a reaction for it to you, but I'm not going to blame you for my reaction. I'm going to assume responsibility for my own reactions. And so if we can open up, if we can create connection, if we can radiate resilience in our one-on-one and in our group interactions, over time that aggregates and those interactions become the culture.
Now, what you're referring to, of course, is the safety cycle in your book. And I want to put this in the context of some of the things that's been happening in corporate America. And again, it's fairly historical, but more recently, there are organizations where they tell their employees that we want you to innovate, we want you to make mistakes and fail fast, and we're not going to punish you. But yet at the same time, those business units, whether they're running EV projects, whether they're running autonomous vehicle projects or some skunk works, it doesn't pan out or it's not according to what they want to see from an earnings report, so they get axed. How does that safety cycle work in that context when people are told to innovate, we're going to protect you, we're going to keep you safe, but in fact, they end up losing their jobs?
Yeah, I think it's a very real tension that you're pointing to. And I think one of the things that differentiates it is if a leader is truly opening up. So for example, if a leader is saying to people, go innovate and you're safe and it's safe to try and go forth, and but in their privately is thinking to themselves, I might have to cut all your jobs, or I might have to shut this division down if it doesn't, but is not saying that to people at the time, then and then has to do that, that's a massive breach of trust. And that will kill a sense of psychological safety, especially because people will then generate narratives about what was going on. But if a leader can say all those things and also say, and I want to open up and let you know, here's the reality that we're dealing with. Here's where we are, in terms of our competitive landscape or financially or different things like that, and treat the people in their organization as adults who can actually handle the complexity of the truth, both the encouragement and the safety, and also the hard reality that leader is dealing with. I think people tend to appreciate that. And the leader may fear, well, if I tell them that, they're going to run for the hills. But I actually think people know that there's more to it. And when they feel like a leader is leveling with them and really sharing the totality of it, I think that's part of the safety that actually gets contributed to. And it's just, we're all on the same page about what we're dealing with. I know in the organization that I run, which is dependent a lot on investment, we try to also have that same type of openness with our employees. And we've said to our employees, there's a scenario right now where there's a massive hill that we need to climb. And here's what we're going to do to try to get the juice to climb that hill. But if we don't get the juice, here's what we're going to have to think about. And it's not the happiest conversation, but people really appreciate that kind of honesty.
I want to go back to one of the things you mentioned earlier on, which is the fact that sometimes people don't ask because they feel like the other party is not interested in hearing them. Can you elaborate on that? And what does the research indicate?
Yeah, so it's that they don't share information when they think that the other person's not interested. And the research basically indicates that, especially in a environment where people are time pressed, or an environment where people are a little bit worried about the consequences, they're going to be watching, did the thing I say last time get acted upon? Did the thing that I say make any difference? Did the leader even thank me for saying what I had to say? Is the leader even telling me or asking me any questions? And generally speaking, in cultures where there is lower psychological safety or lower engagement, unless a leader or anybody is saying to someone, I really need to know your opinion, here's why, and also here's what I'm going to do with it, people might default, or people are more likely to default and just say, well, they didn't ask, so I'm going to keep it to myself. In fact, I was talking to someone recently who said, they have been in organizations where there has been an explicit rule. Like, if the person doesn't ask you for this, don't waste their time. Don't put it on the agenda. Don't make the meeting any longer than you need to. Get in, do your thing, and get out. And so it's all the more reason why, if we actually want to learn from people, we need to let them know that we're interested and why we're interested and what we're going to do with what they have to say.
All right, so let's transition to talk about the ask approach, which is a methodology, and I think you lay it out in 5 practical steps. What are they?
So the ask approach is essentially 5 research-backed practices that, when put together, give us the greatest possible chance of truly tapping into the ideas and insights and wisdom of the people around us. The first one is called choose curiosity. And this is a recognition that if we want to learn from someone, it's not enough to ask a question if we're not actually genuinely curious. And conversely, if we are genuinely curious, that will radiate an energy that will lead other people to see that and feel that and want to tell us. But so often we walk around not curious. We walk around judgmental or righteous, or thinking we know the answer, or not even realizing there's anything to be curious about in the first place. And so choosing curiosity is about injecting question marks into our otherwise very certain views of the world, so that we can center a question right at the front of our mind in any meeting or interaction. And that question is, what can I learn from this person? What can I learn from the person in front of me? What information do they have that I don't have? What experiences do they have? What holes do they see in my thinking? What ways in which, how am I impacting them in ways that I don't see? All of those are things that we can learn from this person. And so that's what choosing curiosity is. Do you want me to keep going through the next ones? Do you want to pause there?
Please. No, let's continue.
Okay, so the second one we were touching on before is called Make It Safe. And this is really about making it as comfortable, easy, and appealing for other people to tell us hard truths as possible. And it was actually interesting, when I was writing the book, I sat down with Amy Edmondson, the expert of psychological safety, and she said, don't say that it's about making it comfortable, easy, and appealing, because it's never comfortable, easy, appealing. It's just as much as possible. There's always some level of risk that someone's going to need to take, but making it safe is about lowering those barriers through the safety cycle that we talked about earlier. The third is called pose quality questions. And posing quality questions is really about expanding the repertoire of questions that we know how to use to really get at the heart of the matter of what's going on. And most of us have, one or two questions that are kind of our go-to questions, and we ask a lot of questions that I call crummy questions, questions that might feel sneaky or leading or attacking to people or just hard to answer. And so I distinguish between crummy questions versus quality questions. Quality questions are questions that help us learn something important from someone else. And just the way a surgeon, has a whole set of different tools that they use to get at different things that they're doing, there's taxonomies of questions. And in the book, I present a taxonomy of questions that we can be using for different purposes that we have. And just to give you one example of an often overlooked question, it's a strategy that I call simply request reactions. Because so often we'll put our point of view and we will assume, well, the other person must agree. And if they didn't agree, they would have told us, or they have a reaction they'll tell us. But for all the reasons we've just discussed, quite often people are not going to tell us what their real reactions are to what we have to say. And so when we request reactions, it's just simply to say what we think and then to say, what's your reaction to that? How did that land with you? How did that strike you? What might I be missing in that? Just that question alone, going back to what we said about people knowing that you're interested, gives an invitation to someone to say, yeah, actually, I'm interested in your reaction. And quite often we get surprised by what their reactions are that they never would have told us. So that's one example of a quality question. Number 4 is called listening to learn. And this is a recognition that even if we pose the best question in the world, it all comes down to, do we actually hear their answer? So many people, and there's a ton of research that shows people think they're so much better at listening than they really are. For the book, I interviewed, world-class listeners in terms of journalists and psychotherapists. And I remember talking to one journalist, Jenny Anderson, who would say, I interview every interview I do with someone I report on, I go listen to that over and over again, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times. And every single time I listened to it, I realized there was something important I didn't hear the time before. And I think to myself, if she's a professional listener and is missing that much information, imagine how much the rest of us are actually missing when we don't record or we don't go back and listen. And I talk about listening through 3 channels. Many of us are trained to listen through one channel, which is the content that someone's saying, how to analyze the facts and the claims and the information and the propositions that they're making. But the other 2 channels are just as important. The second one is emotion. What is the emotion that's being expressed or displayed? Sometimes the emotion channel is actually the most important channel of what's going on. And then the third is action. What are the actions that they're taking? Are they repeating themselves? Are they pushing us to do something? Are they refusing to do something? Are they asking for help, for example? So content, emotion, action. If we can listen through those 3 channels, we can literally triple the information that we're taking in from someone. And then finally, the last one is called reflect and reconnect. This is personally my favorite because I am a learning junkie. And reflection is really about how we squeeze the learning out of an experience that we've had. You can have many experiences that if you don't actually process it and make meaning of it, you're just going to lose the meaning. But reflection is a very straightforward and simple way to say, how do I take what I've heard and convert it into insight and action? I talk about a method called sift it and turn it. Sift it is really to say what's important from what I heard and what can I let go of? Because if I've heard 100 things, maybe there's 3 important nuggets that are important. So I talk about how do you sift that? And then turn it is to ask myself 3 questions. How does this change my thinking about the person, the situation? What steps should I take based on this? And is there anything I'm learning here that would push me in terms of some deeper assumptions or biases or ways of being? Those are the 3 reflective turns. And it's not enough just to do that privately. It's called reflect and reconnect because it's important to go back to the other person and let them know, here's what I learned from you. And thank you. And by the way, did I get it right? Is there anything you would change in what I took away? And doing that I think it's a very rare gift that we give to someone else. It's very infrequent that people will come back to us and say, this is what I learned from you and what I'm going to do about it. And by the way, I care enough about you that I want to know, did I learn the right things? So it really creates a sense of value. And it also, I think it radically increases the chances they're going to be willing to share with us over time. So that's a quick flyover of the ask approach.
Now, as I'm listening, one of the things that comes to mind is performance reviews. And of course, most employees at all organizations are going to have anxieties over upcoming performance reviews. And for them, it's all about, gosh, I want to get that over and done with. And of course, it's all about judgment. It's about things that's negative that people don't like. Or maybe when it's actually done and you receive that feedback, it's done in a way that's fairly trite and it's couched in a lot of platitudes and so forth. So why isn't this methodology integrated into performance reviews so that it actually elicits and brings out true value for both parties?
Which I believe that it 100% should be and could be. And there's a chapter in the book about how to integrate it into organizational structures like performance reviews. But one thing I would say is that if you're waiting for the performance review to be the time when you're hearing someone's feedback for you, it's way too late. These conversations need to be happening on a fluid, ongoing basis so that at the end of the year, the performance review is just simply a recap and there are no surprises on either side of the performance review. In my own organization, we use a process called 2x2s, where multiple times throughout the year, anybody who works with someone else sits down with that person and says, what are 2 things you think I'm doing well? And what are 2 things you think I could do better? And then it flips and the other person does the same thing. And that's just a forcing mechanism to encourage people to ask each other those questions. And it normalizes it because in some cultures, it may feel awkward to be asking someone for that kind of feedback. But in our organization, everyone knows, oh, it's a 2x2. We just do that. And so it kind of prevents things from building up so that hopefully by the end of the year, nobody's surprised in a performance review.
Now, one of the things that also comes to mind is this notion of sales methodology. When you think about salespeople and how they ask questions, they're really not interested in knowing in the true sense. These are questions that are meant to be part of addressing an objection, overcoming something, or it's a mini close. How can some of these approaches, such as quality questions, be utilized in a sales context so that you're really curious about a potential buyer or customer and what they're trying to get from your product or service, so that it shows to the other party that you really care about their need and you want to meet their need versus you're trying to sell something?
Yeah, I believe that the most effective salespeople are truly genuinely interested in and care about understanding the people they're trying to sell to such a degree that the people they're trying to sell to feel almost struck and surprised by how much this person really wants to understand me. And ultimately, those effective salespeople, if they understand the person across from them, their potential buyer, and conclude that what that buyer needs is not what I'm selling, that they're willing to say that. And they're willing to say to that person, now that I understand what you really want and need, or what you have, or what your alternatives are, I don't think what I have today is the right thing for you. And I'm willing to walk away and lose that sale. And when people do that, then the buyers will never forget that. And when that person comes back and says, now I think I actually have something, the level of trust is far greater. And so I do agree with you that I think a lot of salespeople use questions ineffectively in a manipulative kind of way, or in a way that sort of like, if I can just get them to say yes the first time, and then I can get another yes, then I can get another yes, finally I can kind of sneak my way in. And to your point, people feel manipulated. And that's why people are so mistrustful often of sales representatives. But there is that rare and I think really effective salesperson who just wants to understand you. And what they always say is that after that, business takes care of itself. I never have to worry about making a sale if I truly understand the person and I want to put them first.
Absolutely. Well said. Now, I want to go back to what I said around corporate America and just kind of explore a little bit more. So as we speak, although things like unemployment data looks fairly strong in terms of resiliency of the labor market, we are notably seeing quite a bit of layoffs in the thousands across different industries. And some of it is really attributed to the fact that they are trying to improve the bottom line. Others are trying to reclaim capital so they can apply it to investing into Gen AI, for example.
Yeah.
Now, in this context of corporate culture where they tell their people that we care about you, we want to hear from you, and ultimately we want your loyalty, how does this, going back to this whole notion of trust, where trust is a scarce commodity, people are still feeling like they have to walk on shells. So how do they ask, and how do they have both from an employee asking, but also the leadership asking, and have these relationships that are rooted in honesty and openness when you have this bigger context?
Yeah. I mean, there is this reality that's out there, and we're all living inside this broader, corporate capitalist structures that make leaders of organizations need to make hard choices, and understandably hard choices. A couple of things I'll say. One is, if leaders can make that discussable, if leaders can actually say, if I were you, if I were in your shoes, I'd be wondering about this. Is that what you're wondering about? They can then start to make space for people to name, yes, this is what I'm really concerned about. And then that puts it on the table. The second thing a leader can do, and I deeply respect leaders who do this, is to say to their employees, let me lay out for you the situation I'm facing. Here's where my investors are pressuring us. Here's what the customers are doing. Here's what the competitors are doing, et cetera. Here's my best path forward. And I'm including different options that I'm thinking about. Should we divest this? Should we do this, et cetera? A, what do you think? B, what holes do you see in the direction that I'm seeing? And C, maybe most importantly, do you have innovative ideas that I'm not thinking about? And so therefore, it's putting people on the same team as well. And going back to what I said earlier, I do think that is part of what creates trust in organizations.
As a final departing question, let's talk about a bigger context of society and the polarized world that we live in, and certainly an election year with ideological differences, let's say, that divides the country in many ways. How should we be thinking about this ask approach? And I think about this one gentleman who's an African American who chose to befriend Ku Klux Klan members.
Yeah,
and it was interesting how over the years, some of those Ku Klux Klan members viewed this Black man as a true friend. How should we think about this in this very complex geopolitical, highly sensationalized world of ideology and differences?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I've followed that story of Daryl Davis, and he literally has hundreds of Ku Klux Klan robes of people who befriended him to such a degree that they said, "I can't be part of this racist organization anymore." And it all started with a question which he was curious about, which is, how can you hate me if you don't know me? And so he pursued that question and literally genuinely sought to learn from these people who hated him, to a point where they realized they didn't actually hate him, and he learned more where they were coming from. And there's some fascinating, movies about that. And what I would say is that whether the issues are political issues, candidates, global politics, any number of different things, we are more divided than we've ever been before. And I'm not here to say let's all just hold hands and pretend we don't have differences. I'm not here to say that your quote opponent or your enemy, or however you look at it, is somebody that you should find meet with and find middle ground or go over to their side. All I'm simply saying is, I think if we orient to each person as though there's something we can learn from them, even if the thing that we learn is, why do they believe that crazy thing that they actually believe? But really, why do they believe it? Why does it make sense to them to such a point? Can we get inside their head, inside their experience? Usually we learn something really interesting. Sometimes we find more common ground. But oftentimes, at minimum, at a human level, we're able to connect with one another.
So with that, I have been joined by Jeff Wetzler, co-CEO of Transcend. Thank you for joining today.
Great to be with you. Really enjoyed the conversation.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.